Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second author interaction of the 2024 NLF Reading Challenge. My name is Sneha, and I hope you're as excited to be here as I am. Before we begin the interaction, let me give you a brief introduction about the NLF Reading Challenge, followed by a few housekeeping rules for today's session. The NLF Reading Challenge is a 3-month-long reading event from July to September 2024 for students between grades 4 to 6. It runs on the competitive as well as the non-competitive tracks. For the challenge, students read their way through a curated set of 30 books. They discuss the reading with their friends and their guide, log their thoughts, and get to interact with the authors of some of these books online. The challenge will conclude with a quiz competition that will see the 3 best teams win gold, silver, and bronze engraved trophies, certificates of achievement, and a wonderful set of books. For today's event, please use the Q&A box to type out your questions or your responses to what's being discussed during the session. If you're from a school, please mention the name of your school along with your question. And today, we are privileged to have with us the award-winning and best-selling author, Lisa Yee. Lisa has been an inventor, a hand model once, a writer-producer at Walt Disney World, and also Mickey Mouse. In addition to these pursuits, she is a New York Times best-selling author as well as a multiple award winner. She published her first book, Millicent Min, Girl Genius, in 2003, and since has published over 21 books. She has written for a range of age groups, such as the Misfits for young adults, the popular DC Superhero Girls series for middle grade, as well as the Bobby Ellis Chan series for younger readers. Even though Lisa has had a lot of interesting careers, she says that being an author is the best joy in the world. Lisa joins us today to speak about her book, Maizy Chen's Last Chance, which is on the reading list of the challenge. It features a Chinese-American protagonist, Maizy Chen, who, while initially in the dark about her family's history, slowly unravels it with the help of food, fortune, family, and friends. It's a Newbery Honor Book, a National Book Award finalist, and the winner of the Asian Pacific American Children's Literature Award. Welcome, Lisa. We're very happy to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here.
Thank you, Lisa. Would you want to begin the session with a short reading from the book?
Yes, absolutely. So here we go. Maizy Chen's Last Chance. No story starts at the beginning. The pies were fake, but my grandparents didn't know that, not at first anyway. My mother had invited them to watch her work on the tasty, flaky pie crust commercial. When I first started going with her to the set, Mom told me, as a food stylist, my job is to make sure that everything looks good for the camera. Oma and Opa had showed up directly from the airport wearing matching airplane pillows around their necks. My job was to make sure they didn't get into trouble. My grandmother's luggage had barely touched the floor when she rushed over and, in her excitement, practically knocked me down. Oma's hug felt awkward, partly because of the neck pillow, and also because, even though I was 8 years old, it was the first time I had ever met her in person. My best friend thinks it's weird that I don't know my grandparents that well. Her family is really close. It's complicated, I tried explaining to Ginger, but the truth is, I don't understand it myself. My mom and I talk about almost everything, but when it comes to her relationship with her parents, well, that's a different story. On the set, Opa beamed brighter than the soundstage lights dangling overhead. Maizy, you're so big, my grandfather kept repeating before he got distracted by a pretend kitchen with only one wall. That's when Oma pointed to a tight circle of people. Shouldn't they be working, she asked. Why aren't they working? Mom stood calmly in the middle while the director yelled, Charlotte, I need practice pies now. You'll get your pies, Mom said, motioning to the 2 dozen pies lined up on folding tables. Some were freshly baked, others were ready for the oven, preparing for their close-ups. My grandparents watched in shocked silence as Mom's perfectly rounded scoops of mashed potatoes stood in for vanilla ice cream, since potatoes don't melt. Instead of milk, glasses were filled with glue because that looks better on camera. Oma and Opa are in the food business too. They own the Golden Palace. That's their Chinese restaurant in Last Chance, Minnesota. Mom once told me, Maizy, you're the last of the Last Chance Chens. That seemed weird because I've never even been there. I leaned in to eavesdrop as my grandparents began to whisper, where did Charlotte learn that? Not from us. It's not real food. When Mom topped the pies with a can of shaving cream instead of whipped cream, Oma looked like she had seen a zombie. It was all too much. My grandmother grabbed her suitcase with one hand and my grandfather with the other. Come on, we're going home. But we just got here, Opa protested. By now, he had noticed that the back of the oven was missing and there was a camera inside. Before he could say anything more, Oma kissed the top of my head. We love you, Maizy. Come visit us. That was the last time I ever saw my grandparents until today.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. And so let us begin with the epigraph that you just read. It said, no story starts at the beginning. And in the book, we see Maizy, who's well-adjusted and a very curious girl, discovering her history during the time she spends with her Oma and Opa at Last Chance. And you have mentioned that you wrote Maizy's Last Chance, in honor of your grandparents who sailed from China to America over 100 years ago and all the immigrants who made the journey to America. So when you conceived of the story and the characters, did the characters come into focus for you first, or was it the story, which is Maizy's discovery of her legacy?
Oh, that's a great question. It was kind of a combination of things. And like you had said earlier, I've written so many books. This is a book that I could not have written a decade ago. I just wasn't ready for it. And I had started thinking, more recently about my family history. In fact, here's a picture of it. That's my grandparents sitting there when they came over, and my uncles and aunts. But I started thinking about how little I knew about my legacy and my ancestors and my grandparents, because when I was a kid, my mother was always trying to tell me about what life was when she was growing up. And I was like, no, I don't want to hear. That's boring. I don't want to. But then as I got older, I was the one that started asking questions. And so the book just kind of came to me in a rush. I was working on a whole nother book entirely about academic decathlons, and it just wasn't working out. And I went back, and in one night, I wrote up a synopsis for Maizy. And so it started with a character, because my books always start with a character, but the character was me at age 11. And knowing nothing about my heritage, my ethnicity, nothing about that. And then the book started kind of writing itself when I started doing research, and it grew and grew and grew. And then I had to actually make it smaller so it was readable.
Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing that. That was just fascinating. Shall we move on to student questions now? We have a question from Tara Narayanan, Viraj Kapoor, and Kesar Taparia from grade 5 of the Sri Ram School, New Delhi, who ask, why did you decide to put stories inside stories?
Oh,
They're curious to know if this style is something that you thought of consciously and wanted to incorporate into your writing, or did it just pop up as an idea?
well, at first, okay, so I'm going to tell you guys something. That is such a great question that not many people know. The initial idea, so I knew I wanted to write about Maizy, and then I knew I wanted to write about Lucky, her great-great-grandfather, and that it was going to be hard to fit all that into Maisy's story. So I thought, okay, it's going to be 2 stories. But I initially wrote Lucky's story as a graphic novel.
Oh, wow.
And it was embedded in the story, and Maizy was the one writing about her great-great-grandfather and illustrating it. So that was how the book was going to be. But what happened was I started realizing, well, Maizy wouldn't know all this stuff. She wouldn't know. How could she write it and illustrate it if she didn't know? And then so I thought, okay, so I don't know if anybody's familiar with the story Princess Bride, where the grandfather is talking to his grandson and he's telling a story. I started thinking about that, like, okay, well, what if the grandfather is telling Maisie about that? And so I started writing Lucky Story. But what happened was I got so into Lucky Story that it blew up. It was like it took over the story. So it was enough for an entire book, but I had to like pull myself back and think, okay, this book is Maisie, it's about Maisie. Lucky's in it, but this is Maisie's story. So I had to cut it down. And so Lucky Story is, I would say it's maybe about 20% of the book, but at one point it was half of the book.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. And thank you for sharing with us the entire writing process. That was fascinating too. We have one more student question on culture. So, in the book, Maisie is confronted with racial prejudice. That's part of her history. And then history seems to repeat itself when Bud the bear goes missing and is later defaced. And in our present day, as you rightly mentioned, hate crimes against Asian Americans are on the rise, and the rhetoric of the other is coming all too often to the forefront. So, Dhruv, Kshiti, and Adya from grades 4 and 5 at Bloomingdale International School, Vijayawada, want to understand how differences in culture can impact human behavior to such an extent, especially when these cultural differences many a times are simply perceived and far from reality. And this is best explained by the confused Johnny when the poster outside Golden Palace is defaced to read "Go home," and he asks, "But we are home, aren't we?" So how
Right.
do you, yes, this impact of human behavior and culture, how do we reconcile this?
Wow, that's a good question. It's very deep. It is something that I wanted to explore. By the way, here's Bud the bear. So he's
Wow.
sitting with us. Um, so when I was writing the book, when I was finishing it up, it was during the COVID lockdown. And so there was a lot of anti-Asian hate going on in America. And I was really feeling it. I was scared and like Maisie, I grew up in Los Angeles, California, where it's a melting pot. So I wasn't even aware that to some people I look different. But at one point in my life, I moved to a part of the United States where I was the only Asian American, and people started asking me questions just based on how I looked. Nothing else, just based on how I looked. Where are you from? I'd say Los Angeles. It's like, no, where are you from? And all of that worked itself into the book. I would get people complimenting me, thinking they were being very nice on my English, because they would say, well, you don't speak with an accent. It's like, well, I was born here. And people couldn't comprehend that. And to the question, so much of it is based on initial impressions where we don't take the time to talk to someone, to get to know them, to ask them questions. And I was really feeling that. And so I wanted to channel that into the book because, like I said, just like Maisie, growing up, I never thought about that sort of thing. And then it wasn't until I was older that I realized, oh, some people perceive me as different. And that's why one of the main reasons I wanted to write Maisie, because I mean, this sounds odd maybe, but we're all one family. And when people cry or when people laugh, no matter where you are, no matter what language you speak, no matter what country you're from, what culture, religion, it sounds the same. So I wanted to make a point about that.
Thank you. And that message is so well brought out with the book. And thank you for that. Our audience really appreciates it. So coming closer to Maisie's own home, and Dhruv, Kshiti, and Adya have another question. So they were wondering if you thought of cultural differences as one of the reasons contributing to the conflict between Oma and Maisie's mom, because Oma grew up in a bigger city with possibly more diversity, whereas Maisie's mom grew up in a town with no other Asian American children. And so, did this lead to different responses to their cultural identity from each of them, and that contributed to the conflict?
Oh, yes, yes. Great question. It certainly did because you're right. Maisy's grandmother went to college. She was going to have this career, but then she ended up in the small town. She ended up in the small town by choice. And that's very important, the choices we make, but also how our choices affect other people. Her daughter, Maisy's mother, was the only Asian kid in the entire town, and she hated it. And so she fled. She went to Los Angeles, where nobody looked twice at her because she was an Asian American. And so she had determined that she was not going to go home, what she called home, back to Last Chance because she was treated so badly when she was there. But the pull of family, there's so much about family in this book. The pull of family brought her back. But when she initially went there, yes, there was a lot of conflict between, Maisy's mother and Maisy's grandmother. And there was so much misunderstanding, which goes on a lot, and especially between generations. Each thinking the other had wronged them and not talking, not communicating. And it's not until the end of the book, and really with Maizy. And when I write, I assign a word to my main character, and the word for Maizy was bridge,
Oh,
because
wow.
she was a bridge between culture, she was a bridge between geography, between generations. She was a bridge between her mother and her grandmother. So Maizy was the bridge that brought not only her mother and grandmother together, but a town together and so many other people.
Absolutely, very true. We have another student question on Bud the Bear. So, uh, this is Ayansh Gaba from grade 4 at Shiv Nadar School, Faridabad. He says Bud the Bear plays a very important role of being a catalyst in the story. It's his theft, as well as when a slur is painted on him, that prompts Maisie to look closely at each person around her for who they are. So, how did an inanimate object such as Bud find so much space in the narrative? What inspired that?
You know what? Nobody has asked me that before, but Bud and I thank you for that great question. Um, Originally, in an early draft of the book, people had painted on the side of a building, on the side of the restaurant, and but then I started thinking about I wanted to make something, not just the building, but have something like a in the family carry over through generations. And I started thinking about these wooden bears that you'll find in the Midwest that people carve. And so I started writing about Bud. But as I started writing about Bud, he became a character. He wasn't just this statue made of wood, because Bud is a part of history. He has a bullet, he's taken bullets, he's been kidnapped, he's been defaced, but the thing with Bud is no matter what has been done to him, he's still standing there. He's a testament to that family and to that town and to all the immigrants that have come over. So that is such a great question. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great answer too. Speaking about resilience, and what a lovely character to show resilience. There's one more question, because when you were speaking about bridge, there's a question around poker and its part of being a bridge. And we observe that as the story progresses, how poker becomes a medium for Opa and Maisie to understand each other better. Opa also uses poker to teach Maisie life lessons, which Maisie uses to great advantage in the book. It's such an intriguing medium. So why did you choose it?
Okay, so I have to confess, I don't play poker, and
Okay.
but my dad did. My dad played poker, and like sometimes he and his poker buddies would come over, and I would sit at the top of the stairs and I would just listen to the poker chips playing and would listen to them talking. And I was trying to think of some game that was like intergenerational that maybe Maisie didn't know about. And then I started thinking about poker, because that phrase poker face, which means when you try not to let anybody know you're thinking. So I thought, okay, so we'll have her grandfather play poker. But what I ended up doing is I had to read all these books on poker, and I watched a lot of videos on how to play poker, and I made a list of, okay, the tell, and this is, and then but as I started going into it, it's like, this is great because poker is kind of a metaphor for life and and what people are doing and it's a game that they're playing and some are better than others with it. And so that worked its way into the book. But as to the question, it wasn't something that was like, oh, I'm so smart, I'm gonna put poker. It's like, well, okay, what is it? What are they gonna they're gonna play some sort of cards, I knew, because Opa couldn't get out. Or is it going to be a board game? It has to be something that can be done inside. And so poker was one of the things on the list, and it ended up working perfectly for the story.
It's these tiny bits of information that you give us, which makes the book even more interesting. And thank you, Lisa, for sharing it. Going on to books, peppered throughout the story is Principal Holmes and his t-shirts with reference to books such as Reading is My Superpower, so many books, so little time, and Mayor Whitlock's magazine, Minnesota Don't You Know, and its articles also play a pivotal role in the plot. And in the end notes, you also speak about your anxiety around the increasing hate crimes against Asian Americans. And when wondering about what you can do, you tell yourself, keep writing. So, did you intend for these to serve as gentle nudges for just how much books could speak to a reader and for how readers could find themselves in a book?
Yes, totally. And I think that when writing it, and again, when you're writing, sometimes you have all these ideas that are happening in your head, but it isn't until you're done that you look back and reflect and thought, oh, okay, I knew I was trying to do that, but I didn't realize I was doing it at the time. And so like the t-shirts that the principal wears, like I have all these book t-shirts because believe it or not, t-shirts are a form of communication. And in a prior career, I used to be in advertising. So so I did a lot of food commercials and things like that. That's why Maisy's mother does the food commercials. But I knew that slogans actually, say a lot. And so that's why I was doing that. And Mayor Whitlock in there, I wanted to show that not all people that you might think are really great in the beginning are, and that some people that you might not like are much better than you think they are. Because our perceptions, at least mine, can get mixed up and tumbled and go upside down because you might think something, but again, when you get to know a person or when you look deeper, there's more to it than your initial response about looking at someone. So yes, I tried to work all that into it without hitting people over the head though with it.
Yes, it is. Perception and its importance is brought out so well in the book from Maisy's personal point of view and how the community looks at somebody and perception right there, trying to bring in racial diversity. It's such an excellent, subtle way of bringing it out, Lisa. We have another question from Alina Bassam from Neve Academy, and she says, how did the awards your book won make you feel? Does it affect your further writing?
I thank you. I was shocked because even though I've written a lot of books, every time I write a book, I think nobody's going to read it. I just I was so surprised when things started happening. And so like I'll tell you that like for the National Book Award to be a finalist of that, I found out from Twitter. I mean,
Wow.
it was like I didn't get a phone. I was like, it's like somebody tagged me. I'm like, what? What is happening? And yeah, so and like for the Newbery Awards, my editor had said, keep your phone on because I have it on the I block the spam or I block any numbers I don't recognize. So she said, take that off just in case, just in case. And so I took it off like a week ahead just in case. And so I answered every single spam phone call. People trying to sell me hello. But it was I'm still stunned. I'm still amazed. And there is some pressure, though. There was some pressure when I was writing my next book, which is The Misfits,
Mhm.
because coming off of Maizy. But that was also one of the reasons why I wanted to write something so different. Because The Misfits it's a caper, it's a mystery, it's silly, it's funny, and not that there's none of that in Maisie, but it's a different voice, a different kind of book, because I thought if I try to write the same kind of story that I just did, and after winning the awards, people are going to have expectations, and I didn't want to put that pressure on myself.
Yes, amazing. Thank you. So we have a question from Anaya who's asking, are you interested in writing a book dedicated to Lucky?
Oh, I would love to. So I would. Okay, so I should, um, remember that graphic novel I was telling you about?
Yes.
Someday I would like to write his story as a graphic novel.
Oh, wow. We are looking forward to that. That would be
I mean,
amazing.
I've always wanted to write a graphic novel. I have most of it because I wrote it for the book, and so that's something that's kind of like in the back of my mind. It's like, yeah, because I hear so much about people wanting to know about Lucky, and I love that because it's historical, and a lot of times people or readers they want contemporary stuff, not like about somebody's great great grandfather, because that's who Lucky is. It's like, so I'm so warm to people like, I want to know about her great great grandfather. I want to know about her grandpa and grandma. It's like, oh my gosh, that's so great.
Yes. An audience member, in fact, has suggested a title. They call it Lucky Chen's Last Chance, Life in China.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, and because that's where the book started. Remember in the beginning, we talked about the epitaph, the no story starts at the beginning.
Yeah,
Maisie's story doesn't start when she was born. Maisie's story begins in China. Everybody's story, it starts way before they were born.
true.
And,
Absolutely.
when we're talking about Lucky's story, I would encourage all the readers to ask their elders questions about their lives because they have some amazing stories to tell.
Absolutely. Yes. We would encourage your audience members to reach out to your grandparents or anybody in your family today after the author interaction and speak with them. Now, let's talk about the most delectable aspect of the book, the food. From mouth-watering Chinese delicacies at Golden Palace to Carlos's delish dish to Werner's bratwurst, the book is bursting with descriptions of food. And the food brings the people together, be it all the patrons of the Golden Palace or Maizy, Opa, and Werner with Carlos's delish discoveries and bratwurst. The food serves as a common denominator for all of them. And you also spoke about how you poured through hundreds of old Chinese restaurant menus and ate at dozens of Chinese restaurants as part of the research for the book. So,
Do.
so can you tell us what you found out about the power of food from all of your research?
Well, food is another language. Food is a character in the book. And then I found, so here's a photo, a very, very old photo of my grandparents and my parents. Look at all that food on the table.
Absolutely.
There is so much food.
What a
And
spread.
and so, coming from a Chinese family, food is often at the core. And that happens with most families actually. And so I wanted food to be another bridge. I wanted food to be a link. And so even though Lucky ends up in Last Chance and he's at the Golden Palace, which was the Golden Grill before, by changing it and starting to serve Chinese food, he actually invites people into his home, into his culture, and he feeds them. And what better way to show friendship than with food and feeding someone. So yes, that was an enormous part of the book. And yeah, I did eat at a lot of Chinese restaurants, and I still do because I'm still researching it. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. We have time for one last question, unfortunately. So this is from Kyra. She has not had enough about discussions with Maisie, and she says, Mom runs away from her life in Last Chance, and somehow the illness that Opa had brought the family together and gave the story shape. How is it that Maisie loves her life in Last Chance while her mother flees from it?
Oh, wow. That's a great question to end on. You know, Maisie had all these preconceived notions that we always talk about that we do. And when she first went there, she thought it was the most boring place in the world. She couldn't wait to get away. But what she did is her eyes were opened because she came from such a different land. She came from Los Angeles, California, and things that her mother hated about the smallness of the town, Maisie loved because she had come from something completely different. But it took her a while. It took her a while to get to know the people and to, when she made that friend Logan, when she made her friend, that really helped her. And so it was kind of paralleling her mother with Principal Holmes because her mother had one good friend and Maisie had one good friend. And when her mother went back, she had a different view of the town because she had been away for so long and a different view of her parents. And she had her best friend from childhood there to welcome her home.
Thank you very much for speaking with us today, Lisa. It's been an absolute pleasure. And we wish you all the very best with your new novel, The Misfits. We are looking forward to reading it.
Thank you.
Thank you.